As I write, scenes of the old trail come flooding back to me. Places where the earth was like a Persian rug, the lavender, red, and yellow wildflowers mingling with the silvery green prairie grass. There were places where we saw wild turkeys among the cottonwood trees, and where the wild grapevines ran riot. Always there were buffalo. Sometimes we saw them walking slowly in single file along their narrow paths on the way to some distant waterhole. Sometimes we heard a noise like thunder, and then a great herd of wild horses would swoop past us.
Long before New Mexico became a part of the United States in 1846, this land at Watrous, on the eastern side of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, where the Great Plains meet the Rocky Mountains, was home to huge herds of buffalo and nomadic Indians, who lived on these plains and wandered its vast open spaces without hindrance of fences or the encroachment of the white man. When the Spanish conquistadors came to North America in the mid to late 1500s, they brought with them their horses. Over the centuries, the Native American tribes of the plains developed a kindred spirit with these sacred creatures. They thought they were large dogs, sent as a gift from the sky by Old Man, the creator of all things. They called them sky dogs, and the Indians became amazing horsemen who were dependent on their horses for their everyday needs. In many cases, the arrival of the horse transformed the tribe's lifestyle, making hunting, raiding, and migration easier, and in the case of some tribes, shifting the balance of power on the plains. Some of the tribes became infamous for their astounding horsemanship, especially in battle. There also evolved huge herds of wild horses, mustangs, that roamed the plains. In 1680, a Pueblo revolt in Santa Fe forced the Spanish settlers to flee south, deserting their livestock. Initially, the mustangs were descendants of these Spanish horses that migrated onto the plains and Rocky Mountains and throughout the southwest. But later they mingled with escaped wagon horses, cavalry horses, and Indian ponies, adapting successfully to the arid, wide-open grassland. In 1821, William Becknell pioneered a trail between Missouri and Santa Fe, which was then part of Mexico, opening up the Santa Fe Trail to multitudes of traders who crossed the oceans of grass in their prairie schooners or freight wagons. Later, when New Mexico became a United States territory, settlers streamed west too. Wild horses were a very common sight for travelers of the trail, along with huge herds of buffalo, antelope, elk, deer, bears, wolves, coyotes, and prairie dogs. Watrous, known as La Junta in trail days, was an important stopping point and meeting place along the Santa Fe Trail. It was where the two main branches of the trail, the Mountain Branch and the Cimarron Cutoff Branch, reunited after separating in Kansas. It was also where the Sapio and Mora rivers came together too. In 1851, Fort Union was built just 8 miles west of Watrous to protect trail travelers from Indian attacks. It was also an important supply depot, servicing other forts in New Mexico. The ruins of Fort Union are still standing sentinel on the plains near Watrous, and they are open to the public. All around Watrous, the signs of the past are clearly visible, especially in the deeply gouged wagon ruts that crisscross the area. Many books and diaries were written about the Santa Fe Trail, including a poignant memoir by Marian Russel called Land of Enchantment, and a fascinating guide to prairie travel by Josiah Gregg, written in 1844, called Commerce of the Prairies. In Gregg's book, he devotes a whole chapter to the zoology of the trail, and he gives top billing to the wild horses.
By far the most noble of these, and therefore the best entitled to precedence, in this brief notice I am able to present of the animals of those regions, is the Mustang, or wild horse of the prairies. As he is descended from the stock introduced into America by the first Spanish colonists, he has no doubt a partial mixture of Arabian blood. The wild horses are generally well formed, with trim and clean limbs. Still, their elegance has been much exaggerated by travelers, because they have seen them at large, abandoned to their wild and natural gaiety. Then, it is true, they appear superb indeed, but when caught and tamed, they generally dwindle down to ordinary ponies. Large droves are very frequently seen upon the prairies, sometimes of hundreds together, gamboling and curvetting within a short distance of the caravans. It is sometimes difficult to keep them from dashing among the loose stock of the traveler, which would be exceedingly dangerous, for, once together, they are hard to separate again, particularly if the number of mustangs is much the greatest. It is a singular fact that the gentlest wagon horse, even though quite fagged with travel, once among a drove of mustangs, will often acquire in a few hours all the intractable wildness of his untamed companions. Josiah Gregg.
When the railroads reached Santa Fe in 1880, the Santa Fe Trail became more or less obsolete. The buffalo was slaughtered by the millions on the plains by hide hunters until they were almost extinct by the 1880s, and any Indians who had not died of epidemic or starvation or in battle were forced onto reservations. In their place, homesteaders built their towns and farms, plowed the prairies, or ran huge herds of cattle. The great open plains were now crisscrossed with barbed wire.
The buffalo are gone now, gone to the sea of grass. When the railroads came, the old trail was neglected. Weeds sprang up along its rutted way. The old trail, the long trail over which once flowed the commerce of a nation, lives now only in the memory of a few old hearts. It lives there like a lovely, oft-repeated dream. Marian Russel.
Of the 2 million wild horses that roamed America in 1900, an estimate of only 100,000 remain, living on public lands under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Land Management. 50,000 of these horses, however, languish in BLM holding pens due to the BLM's current policy of population control, which involves frequent roundups. The remaining free-roaming Mustangs run in herds, scattered throughout the western states, but with other competitors, such as cattle grazers and the extractive industries, Already utilizing the majority of these same public lands, the future of the surviving Mustangs remains tenuous. To many, America's fabled Mustangs are little more than worthless feral horses, squatters occupying land that they covet. Much like the buffalo and the Native Americans in the 1800s, the last vestiges of the great herds of wild horses that roamed the plains have become modern victims of manifest destiny. At the Shadowlands Ranch in Watrous, New Mexico, a small herd of adopted Mustangs run free along the old wagon ruts of the Santa Fe Trail. They are a living monument to their ancestors who traveled in their hoofprints over 100 years ago. They graze the overgrown ruts worn by thousands of wagons in the days of the old trail.
Since that time, I have striven in vain to reconcile myself to the even tenor of civilized life in the United States, and have sought in its amusements and its society a substitute for those high excitements which have attached me so strongly to prairie life. Yet I am almost ashamed to confess that scarcely a day passes without my experiencing a pang of regret that I am now not roving at large upon those western plains. Nor do I find my taste peculiar, for I have hardly known a man who has ever become familiar with the kind of life which I have led for so many years that has not relinquished it with regret. It will hardly be a surprise then when I add that this passion for prairie life, how paradoxical soever it may seem, will be very apt to lead me upon the plains again, to spread my bed with the mustang and the buffalo under the broad canopy of heaven, there to seek to maintain undisturbed my confidence in men, by fraternizing with the little prairie dogs and wild colts, and the still wilder Indians, the unconquered Sabians of the great American deserts. Josiah Gregg.
When the wind whispers through the prairie grass and the old pioneer ruins, it is easy to hear the ghosts of the past, the millions of buffalo, the creak of the wagons as they trundled across the trail, the songs of the Indians, and the thunder of the hoofs of 1,000,000 wild horses.